Have you ever been called stupid? Not playfully, not as a joke, but in a way that cuts deep. Maybe it came from your boss in a meeting, a partner in an argument, or someone online who wanted to prove you wrong. One short sentence and suddenly your chest tightens, your face heats up, and your mind goes blank. You replay the words for hours, thinking of all the things you should have said. We've all been there. When someone questions your intelligence, it doesn't just sting your ego, it shakes your identity. Because in that moment, they're not just insulting what you said, they're attacking who you are. And if you're like most people, you probably respond in one of two ways. You either stay silent and swallow the insult, letting it echo in your mind for the rest of the day, or you lash out, saying something emotional, defensive, maybe even cruel, then regret it later. But here's the truth. Both reactions give your power away. Silence makes you feel small. Anger makes you look weak. And the person who insulted you, they win either way. Yet, there's a third option, a higher way. It's what the Stoics called mastery of response. The art of protecting your dignity while revealing your intelligence at the same time. Because when you stay calm, collected, and curious in the face of disrespect, you don't just win the argument, you win yourself. In today's world where sarcasm passes for intelligence, and online debates reward outrage more than wisdom, knowing how to handle intellectual insults is a kind of modern superpower. And the Stoics, 2,000 years ago, already mastered it. They didn't clap back or seek revenge. They simply made foolish people expose themselves through their own words. In this episode, we'll uncover 5 clever responses you can use when someone insults your intelligence. Not childish comebacks, not witty burns, but stoic countermoves that keep your power, silence arrogance, and command respect. And here's the twist. The third one is particularly devastating. It turns their insult into proof of your superior critical thinking. Stick around, because by the end of this, you'll never be speechless again when someone tries to make you feel small. You'll know exactly what to say, and more importantly, how to say it. Let's face it, intelligence has become the new battlefield. In meetings, in social media debates, even in family gatherings, people are constantly trying to prove they're the smartest in the room. A single moment of hesitation, one misunderstood comment, and someone will pounce. They'll say something like, "You just don't get it," or "That's not how smart people think," and suddenly, you are not just defending your idea, you're defending your worth. Being insulted for your intelligence hits harder than any personal attack. Because it challenges something deeper than competence. It touches identity. For most people, that moment can spiral into overthinking. Maybe I am not that sharp. Or did I sound stupid just now? But if you look closely, these moments are not about you. They're about power. People insult others' intelligence to elevate themselves, to control the narrative, or to mask their own insecurity. And this is where Stoicism becomes more relevant than ever. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." Those words weren't about war or politics. They were about restraint, the kind of discipline that comes from emotional control. The Stoics believed that intelligence isn't measured by how fast you can argue, or how sharp your words are, but by how steady your mind remains under fire. That's what we'll explore in this episode, how to stay steady when someone tries to shake you. Because true intelligence isn't loud, it's quiet, it's composed. It doesn't need to fight for validation, it radiates authority simply through calm confidence. Over the next few minutes, you'll discover 5 responses, simple, deliberate, but deeply powerful. They'll help you protect your dignity, expose weak reasoning, and remind everyone in the room, including yourself, that intelligence isn't proven through shouting matches. It's proven through composure. Each response draws from Stoic philosophy and applies it to modern life. The first will teach you how to turn arrogance into curiosity. The second will show you how to make emotional people face their own lack of logic. The third response is my favorite. It flips the insult entirely, transforming their attack into a live demonstration of your analytical power. Then we'll move higher to the fourth response, where you stop reacting and start observing the Stoic way of turning conflict into data. And finally, the fifth response, the highest level of control, shows how to reply with grace so complete that their insult dissolves into embarrassment. By the end of this, you'll notice something powerful. You won't just be memorizing clever lines, you'll be changing the framework of how you respond to disrespect. Instead of reacting emotionally, you'll start evaluating behavior with the calm precision of a philosopher. That's what Stoicism does. It trains your mind to remain your own, even when others are trying to invade it. And the beauty is, you don't need to win the moment. You don't need everyone to clap for your wit or admire your comeback. You just need to walk away knowing you never surrendered your peace. You stayed in control of your thoughts, your tone, your presence. That's real intelligence. That's mastery. So as we move forward, think of this less like a list of tricks and more like a discipline, a mindset that rewires how you interpret insults. Because when you understand the philosophy behind each response, you'll see that the power isn't in the words, it's in the stillness behind them. Now let's begin with the first one. It's disarming, it's subtle, and it instantly shifts control back to you. It starts with a simple sentence: "I'd love to hear your perspective on this." But as you'll see, that one line can expose arrogance faster than any argument ever could. There's a certain silence that follows an insult. You know it, the kind that fills a room after someone dismisses your idea with a smirk. You can feel everyone's eyes shifting, waiting to see how you react. Most people either shrink or explode. Neither wins. But there's a third move, one that feels almost counterintuitive, yet instantly flips the power dynamic. You simply say, "I'd love to hear your perspective on this." This line sounds polite, but it carries quiet authority. It tells the other person, "You don't get to defy my intelligence. You'll have to prove yours." Because when someone insults you, what they're really doing is making a claim of superiority. And claims require evidence. By inviting them to explain their reasoning, you shift the burden of proof back to them. Suddenly, they're the ones under examination. Let's picture this in a modern setting. Imagine a marketing meeting. Sarah has just finished presenting her campaign strategy. One colleague, known for being loud but rarely insightful, leans back and says, "You clearly don't understand how a target audience thinks." Everyone chuckles nervously. It's a direct jab at her intelligence. Now, most people in Sarah's position would get defensive. "Actually, I've researched this thoroughly." Others might retreat into silence, letting the insult hang in the air like a stain. But Sarah takes a breath and replies, calmly, "I'd love to hear your perspective on this. What am I missing about how they think?" The tone is key. It's not sarcastic, not biting. It's curious, genuinely curious, and that's where the magic happens. A colleague, suddenly forced to explain himself, starts mumbling vague generalizations about young people wanting authenticity without citing any real data. Sarah listens, nods, and asks a follow-up question. "That's interesting. Do you have any specific examples from our last campaign that support that?" At that moment, the power shifts. The room realizes who actually understands the audience and who's bluffing. This is the subtle brilliance of the Stoic approach. You don't defend your intelligence. You demonstrate it through composure and inquiry. You let curiosity do the fighting for you. Epictetus once said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." What he meant wasn't self-deprecation, it was freedom. The Stoic doesn't fear being underestimated, because truth will reveal itself through reason and calm persistence. When you respond with curiosity instead of emotion, you are not trying to win the argument, you're inviting clarity. You're showing that understanding matters more to you than ego. And that's the hallmark of genuine intellect. Philosophically, this response aligns with one of the most powerful Stoic principles, the dichotomy of control. You cannot control what someone says about you, but you can control your reaction, your tone, and your focus. By asking for their perspective, you reclaim that control. You no longer react to their insult, you redirect it. You make them work to justify it, and in doing so, you expose whether there's any substance behind their words, and psychologically, it's devastating to anyone whose insult comes from insecurity. Because deep down, most people who mock others' intelligence don't actually have confidence in their own. Their power depends on you reacting emotionally. But when you stay calm and curious, they lose their weapon. You've turned their attack into a self-test, one they usually fail. This approach also works beyond offices or boardrooms. It applies to friendships, relationships, even online discussions. When someone says, "You really don't understand how this works," you can reply gently, "That's possible. I'd love to hear how you see it." In one move, you disarm the aggression, invite dialogue, and place yourself in the position of the rational adult in the room. The person who doesn't need to shout to be right. But remember, delivery is everything. If your tone carries even a hint of sarcasm, the magic disappears. The power of this response lies in its sincerity. Your voice should sound genuinely interested, even calm, like a teacher asking a student to elaborate. Because here's the truth, you're not trying to humiliate them. You're letting them do that to themselves, and over time, this behavior builds something even more valuable than verbal victory. It builds reputation. People start to notice that when you're challenged, you don't lose your cool, you don't bite, you stay grounded, thoughtful, and graceful. That kind of composure makes others trust you, even admire you. It tells the world, "You can't shake me with words." So the next time someone questions your intelligence, don't fight for validation. Breathe, look them in the eye, and say, "I'd love to hear your perspective on this." Because that's what a Stoic would do, turn condescension into an opportunity to reveal truth. When you do that, you're not just defending your intelligence, you're displaying it, quietly, confidently, and without ever raising your voice. There's a kind of insult that doesn't shout, it slices. It usually comes from someone with authority, a manager, a client, a senior colleague. They don't need to raise their voice. Their tone alone says, "You clearly don't know what you're talking about." When that happens, most people react in one of two ways. Some freeze, afraid of making things worse. Others push back, trying to defend every detail of their work. But both approaches come from the same place, emotion, and emotion is exactly what the other person is trying to provoke. Because the moment you react from ego, you confirm their assumption. You look less intelligent, less composed, less in control. Now imagine this. You're in a project meeting. You've spent days preparing a cost-saving plan that could benefit the company. You present it clearly, logically, and then your boss cuts you off. That's a dumb idea. You clearly don't understand how but it's work in this industry. The room goes silent. You can feel everyone waiting for your reaction. The tension is so thick it almost hums. But instead of defending yourself, you breathe once and say calmly, "Help me understand your reasoning behind that. What specific aspects am I not considering?" That sentence does something incredible. It turns the spotlight away from you and directly onto the accuser. You've shifted the dynamic without aggression, without sarcasm. Now, they have to explain themselves. They have to prove their point, logically, in front of everyone. And if their criticism was just emotional posturing, they'll start stumbling. They'll repeat vague phrases like "it's just how it's done," Well, that's the standard. Without providing any real evidence at that moment, you've already won. Not because you humiliated them, but because you revealed something deeper, that your thinking is guided by reason, while theirs is guided by ego. This response is one of the most practical expressions of Stoic discipline. Seneca wrote, "No man is crushed by misfortune unless he has first been deceived by prosperity." What he meant was that our downfall usually begins when we stop examining things rationally. The Stoic never reacts to surface emotion. He looks for logic beneath it. When you say, "Help me understand your reasoning," you're doing exactly that. You're calling attention to the quality of thought rather than the noise of reaction. You're telling the world, I operate by reason, not emotion, and that is the foundation of both intelligence and character. Marcus Aurelius governed an empire with this mindset every day. He faced advisors, senators, and soldiers who disagreed, sometimes disrespectfully. But he trained himself to ask questions instead of taking offense, because he knew that to rule others, he first had to rule his own mind. When you ask for reasoning instead of defending your pride, you're practicing that same inner governance, the leadership of self. Psychologically, this response has a disarming effect. People who attack others' intelligence often do so to mask insecurity. When you respond with curiosity, you deprive them of the drama they crave. You turn confrontation into conversation. Their emotional weapon suddenly becomes useless. You're showing them without saying it that insults don't reach you because you live in a higher mental space, the realm of analysis, not reaction. And it's not just about being calm. It's about being surgical. You're examining their argument like a philosopher dissecting a claim. You're essentially saying, let's see if your opinion survives the test of logic. That tone measured, objective, almost scientific makes emotional people deeply uncomfortable. It forces them to confront the weakness of their own reasoning. Of course, the tone matters. The line must be delivered with genuine curiosity, not passive aggression. If you sound like you're setting a trap, the effect disappears. But if your tone is calm, professional, even inviting, you project real intellectual confidence. Because only someone secure in their intelligence can respond to an insult with curiosity instead of defensiveness. And here's the long-term payoff. When you consistently respond this way, people around you start to change how they treat you. They begin to think twice before throwing careless criticism. They learn that if they attack you emotionally, you'll make them defend their reasoning publicly, and most people would rather avoid that. You earn a quiet kind of respect, the kind built not on dominance, but on poise. There's also something else. You start to feel lighter, because when you stop reacting emotionally to attacks, you stop carrying other people's chaos. You begin to realize that their tone, their condescension, their words, all of it belongs to them, not to you. You're just holding up a mirror, asking them to look at what they've created. That's the Stoic way, to see through the noise, to separate judgment from fact, to stay calm even when someone tries to make you feel small. You don't silence them by force. You silence them with logic. So the next time someone questions your understanding or dismisses your idea, resist the urge to explain yourself. Instead, breathe, look them in the eye and say, help me understand your reasoning behind that. Because reason is the Stoics' shield and calm curiosity is the blade that ends every baseless attack. There's something quietly powerful about the word assumption. It's one of those words that immediately exposes how fragile someone's argument really is. Because when you name it, when you calmly point out that what they're saying is based on an assumption, not a fact, you've already shifted the conversation into your territory, the realm of reason. Picture this: you're at a dinner gathering. The conversation drifts to the economy, inflation, the job market. You share a thought maybe about how people overreact to economic trends and someone across the table smirks. They say, "You obviously don't know much about economics if you think that." The table goes quiet. You can feel the condescension dripping from their voice. It's not just disagreement, it's dismissal. The kind that's meant to push you out of the conversation. Now, you could defend your credentials. You could say, "Actually, I studied this, or I work in finance." But that would mean you've accepted their frame that you owe them proof of your intelligence. Instead, you take a sip of water, steady your tone, and say, "That's an interesting assumption. What led you to that conclusion?" That single question is what no argument can. It stops them cold, because you're not reacting, you're analyzing. You've just moved the discussion from emotion to structure, and in doing so, you've exposed what most insults are built on: thin air. When you ask what led you to that conclusion, you're making them confront their reasoning or their lack of it. It's a calm, clinical dissection of their judgment. And for someone who thrives on emotional dominance, that's deeply uncomfortable. They're no longer the one evaluating you, you're evaluating them. This is where Stoic philosophy reveals its brilliance. Epictetus warned, "It is not things that disturb us, but our judgments about things. Every insult is just that, a judgment. A subjective reaction dressed up as truth." When someone calls you unintelligent, they're not describing you. They're describing their own perspective, shaped by bias, insecurity, and emotion. By asking, "What led you to that conclusion?" you're holding up a mirror to that distortion. You're saying, "Let's see if your judgment can stand up to reason." Marcus Aurelius practiced this constantly. In his meditations, he reminded himself to examine the impressions that entered his mind. Ask yourself, is this true? Does it make sense? What evidence supports it? You're applying that same discipline, but externally. You're turning the Stoics' internal dialogue into a public act of calm scrutiny. Psychologically, this response flips the power balance instantly. Most people who throw intellectual insults expect resistance. They want a reaction, a flash of anger, a defensive speech, a sign that they've struck a nerve. But when you respond with curiosity instead of emotion, you rob them of that satisfaction. You're not defending yourself, you're studying them. That shift terrifies people who rely on intimidation. It's like turning the lights on in a dark room. Suddenly, every flaw in their reasoning becomes visible. They start fumbling for justifications. "Well, it just seemed like you didn't understand." Or "That's not what an expert would say." Each vague answer exposes the real truth. Their insult wasn't based on analysis. It was based on ego. But here's the deeper wisdom. This response isn't about humiliating them. It's about refusing to play their game. Because when you question their assumption, you're signaling that you live by evidence, not emotion. You're demonstrating that you think before you react. And that's what separates intellectual maturity from intellectual insecurity. In modern life, this approach is gold. In a meeting, it helps you challenge unfair criticism without appearing defensive. In relationships, it stops emotional manipulation dead in its tracks. Even online, when someone mocks your intelligence in a comment, you can reply calmly, "That's an interesting assumption. What makes you say that?" 9 times out of 10, they won't reply because insults rarely survive the light of logic. The Stoics believed that power begins where emotion ends. By confronting assumptions with calm analysis, you prove that your intelligence doesn't depend on being right, it depends on being rational. You're not here to win arguments. You're here to understand truth, and that's the kind of composure people remember. Not the loud one who shouted the last word, but the quiet one who asked the right question. Over time, you'll notice something remarkable. The more you respond this way, the less people even try to insult you. Because your calm analysis becomes a mirror, one that exposes their insecurity faster than any comeback ever could. Seneca wrote, "It is the power of the mind to be unconquerable. When you say, "That's an interesting assumption," what led you to that conclusion? You are embodying that power. You're telling the world that your peace is non-negotiable. You don't need to prove your intelligence, you just make others prove theirs. So the next time someone underestimates you, don't explain, don't defend, don't argue. Just smile slightly, breathe, and ask the question that every Stoic would. What led you to that conclusion? Because that's the sound of true intellect, measured, fearless, and impossible to insult. There's a certain kind of argument that tells you everything you need to know about a person long before they finish speaking. It's the one where they stop talking about the issue and start talking about you. You've seen it before. You're in a meeting, calmly discussing a problem, and someone interrupts with, "You're too naive to understand how this industry works," or online. You post an opinion and someone replies, typical of someone who doesn't think things through. Notice the pattern. They're no longer engaging with your idea, they're attacking your character. And the moment you defend yourself, you've already lost the frame. That's where this line comes in. I find it interesting when people lead with personal attacks instead of addressing the issue. It's not sarcastic. It's observational. It's the verbal equivalent of stepping out of the argument, walking around it, and calmly describing what you see. In one sentence, you've shifted the conversation from you versus them to logic versus emotion. Imagine this scenario. Jennifer, a project manager, proposes a new communication plan for a client. The team is tense, deadlines are close, and one frustrated colleague blurts out, "That's stupid." You clearly don't get how this business works. The room goes still. Everyone's waiting for the explosion and emotional back and forth that will waste 10 minutes and solve nothing. But Jennifer doesn't bite. She tilts her head slightly and says, "I find it interesting when people lead with personal attacks instead of addressing the issue. It usually means we've touched something important that's worth discussing." The energy in the room changes immediately. Her tone isn't sharp, it's steady, professional, almost analytical. She hasn't defended herself. She's defined the moment, and that's what makes this response so powerful. You're not participating in their chaos, you're observing it. You're describing behavior from a higher altitude. It's what the Stoics called the view from above. Marcus Aurelius practiced this mental exercise daily. He imagined rising above the city, looking down on human behavior as if from a mountaintop. From that height, petty insults looked small, temporary, almost comical. He wrote, "Observe how transient all things, how insignificant the actors and their acts. When you respond this way, you're doing the same thing. You're not taking the insult personally. You're analyzing it like data. You're showing the world that you understand psychology better than the person trying to provoke you. It's a form of social intelligence, reading emotion without becoming part of it. Because people who rely on personal attacks often reveal more about themselves than they realize. Their hostility usually comes from frustration, envy, or fear. They insult others when they can't handle disagreement. And by calmly identifying their behavior, you hold up a mirror they can't escape from. This isn't just a defense, it's education in real time. You're teaching everyone in the room what emotional maturity looks like. You're showing that professionalism isn't about suppressing anger, it's about mastering perspective. And that's the essence of Stoic detachment. Not indifference, but clarity. You're not cold or uncaring, you're composed. You still care about the discussion. You just refuse to let emotion dictate the tone. The psychological shift this response creates is subtle but profound. When you analyze someone's behavior instead of reacting to it, you become the authority in the room. You've moved from being the target to being the observer. They're no longer attacking a person, they're performing, and you're the one quietly evaluating the performance. There's a quiet dominance in that position. Not the loud, aggressive dominance of ego, but the silent dominance of composure. It says, "You can throw your emotions at me, but I'll meet them with clarity." Of course, delivery is everything. If you say the line with irritation or mockery, it loses all its strength. The tone must be calm, observational, even slightly curious, as if you're noting a weather change. Because that's what it is, emotional weather. Temporary, external, not yours to control. Over time, people will notice. They'll realize that you don't get dragged into pointless conflicts, that you can call out unprofessional behavior without losing respect. You will start to be seen as the person who brings logic back into emotional rooms, the one people trust to stay grounded when everyone else is reacting. And perhaps most importantly, you'll protect your inner peace. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. When you treat insults as information instead of injury, you embody that strength. You become untouchable not because you're invincible, but because you choose where your attention goes. So the next time someone launches a personal attack instead of a real argument, take a breath, step back mentally, and say, "I find it interesting when people lead with personal attacks instead of addressing the issue." Then watch what happens. You'll see confusion, maybe even embarrassment, because when wisdom walks into the room, aggression suddenly looks small. There's a level of composure most people never reach, not because it's impossible, but because it requires letting go of something we're taught to cling to, the need to be right. When someone attacks you, your first instinct is to prove your worth, to correct them, to show that you know more than they think you do. But the Stoic understands something deeper. True strength isn't in winning arguments, it's in refusing to let them disturb your peace. This last response captures that power perfectly. "I appreciate you sharing your perspective." Simple, graceful, and devastatingly calm. It's the verbal equivalent of an unshakable mountain, solid, immovable, yet not hostile. You're acknowledging the other person without validating the insult. You're showing that their words have no control over your sense of self. Picture this. Maria's at a family dinner. Her brother, trying to sound superior, says loudly, "You should stay out of financial discussions." "Maria, you are not smart enough to understand how this business works." The room freezes. Everyone feels the sting. It's the kind of moment that can fracture relationships for years. But Maria doesn't flinch. She looks at him calmly and says, "I appreciate you sharing your perspective." Then she turns to her uncle and continues the original conversation as if nothing happened. No sarcasm, no raised voice, just poised. And in that moment, everything shifts. Her brother, who expected a fight, has nothing left to push against. His attempt to humiliate her collapses into awkward silence. The family sees it too, who lost control and who stayed centered. That's the beauty of this response. It doesn't just protect your dignity, it magnifies it. It's an act of restraint that feels like grace. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." And nothing demands more bravery than meeting disrespect with calm appreciation. Because when you say, "I appreciate you sharing your perspective," what you're really saying is, "Your words can't define me." The Stoics believed that virtue and composure were the highest forms of intelligence. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, the best answer to anger is silence. He wasn't suggesting cowardice, he meant mastery. The power to remain unmoved, even when provoked. This response lives in that same spirit. It's not passivity, it's presence. It tells everyone watching that you don't fight for validation, because you already know your worth. Psychologically, it's a paradox. When someone insults you, they're trying to control the emotional tempo. They want to create tension and pull you into it. But when you respond with composure, when you stay grounded and even kind, you break their rhythm. You take away their sense of power. They can't escalate, because there's nothing left to react to. That's why this line is often the hardest one to use. It takes courage to remain gracious in the face of disrespect. It feels unnatural at first, like surrender, but it's not surrender. It's transcendence. You're operating from a higher frequency, one where ego no longer dictates behavior, and over time, that kind of restraint becomes your reputation. People start to associate your name with calm. They notice that no matter how chaotic things get, you never lose composure. They start coming to you for advice, for leadership, for steadiness. Because in a world where everyone's reacting, the one who doesn't becomes magnetic. There's also a subtle psychological reward that comes later peace. When you stop trying to fix other people's opinions of you, you free yourself. You begin to see insults for what they really are. Noise, projections, temporary emotional storms that pass as quickly as they arrive. You no longer feel the need to explain or justify yourself. You simply exist in quiet confidence, guided by your own principles, not the approval or disapproval of others. The key, again, is tone. The line, "I appreciate you sharing your perspective," only works when spoken sincerely. If it carries even a hint of sarcasm, it loses its weight. But if it's genuine, if it comes from a place of calm curiosity, it reflects deep self-assurance. It says, "I see you, I hear you, and your words don't shake me." That's the highest form of power, the power to stay kind in a moment designed to make you cruel. It's what Marcus Aurelius meant when he said, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." Because when someone tries to drag you down, and you stay compassionate, you don't just rise above them, you show them another way to be docked, so the next time someone tries to insult your intelligence. Remember this, you don't have to fight to prove you're smart. You don't have to explain yourself to anyone who's determined to misunderstand you. Just smile, stay calm, and say, "I appreciate you sharing your perspective," because wisdom doesn't argue, it endures. And in that endurance lies a quiet, unshakable strength. Let's take a step back. We began with a simple question. How do you respond when someone insults your intelligence? And now, after walking through all 5 Stoic responses, you've probably realized something powerful. This was never about clever words. It was about mastering yourself. You see, the real battle isn't in what's said aloud. It's in the space between the insult and your reaction. That space is where your character lives. And every time you choose calm over chaos, you strengthen it. You learned that the first response, "I'd love to hear your perspective," disarms arrogance with curiosity. It transforms insult into invitation instead of defending yourself. You make them defend their own words. Then the second, "Help me understand your reasoning behind that," shows that logic is your ground. You expose empty emotion without raising your voice. You remind the world that reason, not reaction, defines intelligence. The third response, that's an interesting assumption. What led you to that conclusion? That one's special, because it flips the entire dynamic. You're no longer the target. You're the analyst. You're studying their thought process, calmly revealing that most attacks are built on nothing more than ego. Then comes the fourth. I find it interesting. When people lead with personal attacks instead of addressing the issue, that's the Stoic serial view. You've risen above the noise and started observing human behavior like a philosopher. You're no longer playing the game. You're describing it. And finally, the last one. I appreciate you sharing your perspective. The purest form of strength. You don't resist. You don't retaliate. You simply remain. That kind of peace confuses people because they can't manipulate what they can move. These 5 responses aren't about outsmarting others. They're about outgrowing them. Each one moves you higher up the Stoic ladder, from curiosity to logic to reflection to detachment and finally to grace. It's an evolution of the mind, from reaction to response, from ego to equilibrium. And that's what Stoicism really teaches, that the world will test you through people's words. But it's your reactions that reveal your philosophy. When someone insults you, you're being handed an opportunity. a chance to prove, not to them, but to yourself, that you've risen above the need to prove anything at all. Marcus Aurelius understood this well. He wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment." That's what these responses help you do. Revoke the power of insult. They teach you to respond from stillness instead of ego, from reason instead of resentment. And that brings us back to where we started. Remember that third response I mentioned in the hook, the one that could turn an insult into proof of your intelligence. Now you see what I meant. Because when someone attacks you and you stay calm, measured, and intelligent, they've just proven your point for you. Their anger exposes weakness. Your composure reveals strength. The contrast speaks louder than any defense ever could. The Stoics believed that wisdom wasn't about escaping life's challenges, but mastering the art of facing them with dignity. You can't stop people from insulting you, but you can decide what that insult becomes, a wound, or a weapon for growth. When you choose to stay calm, to stay present, to stay you, the insult dissolves, and all that remains is your integrity. So the next time someone questions your intelligence, remember this: your worth doesn't live in their words, it lives in your response. The calm voice, the steady breath, the quiet mind. That's where real power begins, and that's what Stoicism is all about. Not being untouched by the world, but being unshaken by it. If this message spoke to you, if it reminded you that staying calm doesn't make you weak, it makes you wise, then I want you to take one more small step. Pause for a moment and think about the last time someone insulted your intelligence. Did you react, or did you respond? That difference, that 1 second choice, is where your growth begins. And if you found something here that helps you take back that 1 second, I invite you to stay connected. Like this video if it brought you value. It's a small gesture, but it helps more people discover this kind of calm in a noisy world. And if you haven't already, subscribe to StoicCraft, where we explore how ancient philosophy meets modern life, one challenge at a time. But more than that, I'd like to hear from you. Has anyone ever questioned your intelligence? How did you handle it? Did you stay silent, or did you find your words? Share your experience in the comments, not for validation, but to remind others that composure can be learned, practiced, and lived. Because together, we're not just talking about Stoicism, we're practicing it. One conversation, one response, one moment of calm at a time. Stay grounded, stay steady, and remember, you don't need to prove your intelligence when your peace already speaks for you.